Hi, this is David with David's Tutorials, and today I'm going to share with you the results of years of experimentation, trial and error, and show you the best way I've ever found to cook steak. Even if you're not personally a fan of steak, the techniques I'm about to share with you work equally well for chicken, turkey, pork, roast, any other kind of meat. If you'd like to hear about those other kinds of meat, I'll be happy to share them with you. Just let me know in the comments down below, and I'll be happy to make a new tutorial about the other kinds of meat besides steak. As you can tell by the color of my hair, I've had quite a few years to build up experience and to test the various kinds of things that work, the things that don't work, and find the things that work really well. So what I'm about to share with you is what I found that works really well. And as I said, it works on pretty much any kind of meat, but I'm going to be talking in this video mostly about steak. First, I'll go over the method in a nutshell so you can have it right up front, but then I'm going to go into some details for you. This method is called sous vide, and what it means is you immerse your meat in a bag in a constant temperature water bath and cook it for a certain period of time. As I said, the method works for pretty much any meat. The only difference between the meats is the temperature at which you cook it and the length of time you cook it for. It is pretty much a two-step process. Step number one is the water bath, the sous vide bath, but step number two is finishing. That's the nutshell. Let's go into some details. Now, the results of this process, they are truly outstanding. Now, I haven't been able to verify in person, but I've heard that most of the really expensive steakhouses use this method to cook their own steaks. The hotels that put on meals for big groups of people, this is the method they use. Sous vide is something that professional chefs use when they want to produce really outstanding results. Let's see how we do it. One of the reasons you want to do sous vide is that it cooks the meat perfectly to medium rare, medium well, whatever level you want, and that's dependent on the temperature. But the other thing is by cooking it a long time at a low temperature, it not only gets tender and juicy, but it pretty much guarantees you're going to kill all the pathogens in the meat. Now, the United States Department of Agriculture recommends that you cook beef to 145 degrees. The reason for this is that 145 degrees will kill all of the pathogens pretty much right away. The thing is, pathogens cannot survive at a temperature above 120 degrees. It just takes longer to kill them if it's below 145 degrees. But with sous vide, time is no problem. So all we have to know is how long do you have to cook it at a specific temperature level to make sure all the pathogens are killed. Now for steak, that's 129 degrees or 54 degrees centigrade. At 129 degrees, you can kill all the pathogens if you cook it for 15 to 20 minutes. I prefer to err on the side of caution, and let's go for 20 minutes at 129 degrees. Now for steak, 129 degrees or 54 degrees centigrade is the perfect temperature for cooking it to medium rare. Medium rare is the doneness for steak that will produce the tenderest and juiciest cuts of meat. You may like yours more well done, medium rare, medium well, any of these. You just have to cook it at a higher temperature. I'm going to let you look it up on the internet to figure out what those temperatures are. We're just talking about the best steak I have ever had, and that's a medium rare steak cooked at 129 degrees. Another thing you need to know about sous vide is low and slow is the way to go. What that means is the longer you cook it, the tenderer it's going to be. You will not overcook your meat if you cook it in a sous vide at a constant temperature, because to be overcooked, the temperature of the meat has to come up to a higher temperature. When it's overcooked, you've probably been there as many times as I have. The meat gets a little bit tough, a little bit tasteless. It's just not as good as when it's cooked the right way. Now, to cook meat by sous vide, you really don't need specific equipment, but like most other things in life, if you have the right tools, the job is so much easier. Now, when I very first got started learning about sous vide, I didn't want to run out and spend all this money on a sous vide machine, not knowing whether it was going to work. So what I did was I put a pot of water on the stove and I turned up the heat. I got out my laser thermometer and I watched the temperature of the water, and I got it up to between 130 and 135 degrees. Doing it manually, this was as close as I could do, but it's still not bad. I put the meat in a zipper top bag, got all the air out of the bag by immersing the meat in the water and then closing the bag, put the meat in the bag in the water, maintained the temperature between 130 and 135 degrees for about 45 minutes. Let me tell you, that was a chore, having to constantly adjust the temperature on the stove to make sure the temperature of the water maintained in that range. But when I finished, oh, yum, was that good steak. I mean, it was done perfectly. Once I tasted how delicious that steak was, I jumped online, I did some research, I went out and I bought myself a sous vide water circulator. Now I'm going to put a link in the description down below to show you which sous vide circulator I bought. Let me tell you a little bit about the one I bought and why I bought this one. By the way, if you're watching this video somewhere besides on YouTube, then what you need to do is look at the YouTube logo in the lower right-hand corner of this. See that YouTube logo right there? Just click on that. It will open up a new tab in your browser to this video, and it'll pick up right at this particular point, and you will then see the description where the links will be if you want to follow the links, and you'll also be able to leave comments. After researching sous vide circulators, I wound up opting for the one that had manual controls. Why? Well, there are plenty of other sous vide circulators available, and many of them will interface with your phone via Bluetooth. But you know what? I've been reading other health-related articles that have convinced me we have far too much electromagnetic frequency pollution in our homes, and I just didn't want to add any more. If electromagnetic frequency pollution, also called EMF, makes you scratch your head, if you'd like to know more about that, put a comment in the section down below. I'll be happy to put up another video explaining what I've learned about electromagnetic frequency pollution and why it's something we need to be aware of. But that's not the topic. This video is about how to cook steak. So what you do with a sous vide circulator and the steak is you have to have a pot or a tub or some kind of vat that will hold the water that will allow the sous vide circulator to clip onto the side of it. You fill the tub up with water, you put your meat in a waterproof bag and let the air out of it. Now, there's two principal ways that I have done this. I started off doing it in the zip top bags, and the way I would do it at that time is I'd put the meat in the bag, I'd stick my pinky inside the bag, and then zip the bag closed on my pinky till there was just a little bit of hole left for the air to come out. I would then take the bag, put it into the water, and dip it in the water until most of the air was out of the bag. Then I would close that last little bit of the zip thing, and the meat will generally sink right down into the water with no problem. Since then, I have invested in a food saver sealer device. When we get a lot of meat that we want to sous vide all at once and then save some of it, maybe even freeze it, we do it in these pouches and it works just fine. Either way works. All you need to know is you need to put your meat in a waterproof pouch, get all the air out of it, and then immerse it in the water. Once you do that, you put the sous vide circulator into the water. You set the temperature. If it's steak, it's 129 degrees, and you set the time on this circulator for how long you want it to cook. I generally set it for longer than I need, just in case I get a little bit hung up with something and get busy and don't have time to watch it. It will keep going. Remember, it won't overcook. It won't get overdone. It'll just get more tender. You set the sous vide circulator, turn it on, get it circulating the water at that temperature. You're done until the meat is finished cooking. That's all there is to it. Now, another thing that I do, and this helps shortcut the process, when I fill my tub with water, I just use hot water right out of the sink. You know, most sinks have an extendable faucet. I just bring the faucet over to the tub, turn on the hot water, and fill up the tub to the point where I want the water. turn off the water, put the circulator in it. Generally, the temperature of the water is a little bit higher than the circulator is set for, which is fine. As soon as you put the meat in, it's going to cool it right down, but the circulator will then keep it at that constant temperature. I put this rack in the bottom of the sous vide vat to lift the bags up off of the bottom and let the water circulate underneath. This will let the water circulate more freely and make the temperature adjustment more even. The main thing to remember when cooking meat via sous vide is leave it in the bath a long time. If it's cut an inch, 2.5 centimeters thick or less, 20 minutes should do it. I generally would go for a minimum of a half an hour. As I said, it's not going to get overcooked. It'll just get over tender. But by leaving it in that long, you're going to be sure to kill all the pathogens in there, and you won't get sick from any sort of biological contamination that might be in the meat. If the meat is thicker than an inch, if perhaps you're going to put in an entire roast. Now, we have done that. We one time went out and we got a round roast. Have you ever tried to cook a round roast? If you have, you know this is one of the toughest cuts of meat on the market. It's got good flavor, but if you just roast it, if you even cook it in the sous vide for a long time and then you cut it a ½ inch thick and try to take a bite of it, you're going to be chewing that thing forever. I cooked it in the sous vide 4 days. 4 days in sous vide. It got about as tender as it was going to get, but because it's a tough cut of meat, I wound up having to put it through a meat slicer and cutting it paper thin. When I did that, was that a good cut of meat. It just had a marvelous flavor. And if you've ever priced a round roast, you know it's priced way lower than the more tender cuts of meat. I've got something to show you here in a little bit that will demonstrate the difference in prices between the various cuts of meat. Speaking of cuts of meat, let's go into that right now. Before I got this sous vide circulator, my favorite cut of meat, of course, was filet mignon. If you're like me, you don't like spending any more money than you have to get a really good cut of meat. Sometimes you're willing to spend more money just to get that deliciousness. But there are times when you just want to get something that's really good without spending that kind of money. Here's what I found out. We used to go to the big box store and purchase the entire big beef tenderloin. It's so funny because this beef tenderloin, goodness, how can I show you? It's about 2.5 to 3 feet long, and it's fat on one end and it's thinner on the other end. It's kind of like a baseball bat. So my wife and I had fun referring to going out and buying a baseball bat or butchering a baseball bat or cooking up a baseball bat. And if anybody else was listening, you'd kind of look at us and say, what are you talking about? It was just kind of fun. So anyway, we'd buy the whole beef tenderloin, and these things cost between $70 and $95 depending on how big they are. Here we are at the whole beef tenderloin section. Let's take a look at what they've got here. Here's a whole beef tenderloin. And you can see this is $17 a pound. $77 for that particular one. We'll come over here to this one. $81. $87. So you see, these are not cheap cuts of meat. It's good meat, but it's also very expensive. We justified it by realizing we could cut this beef tenderloin up into usually 10 to maybe 12 filet mignons. And if you amortize that, you ever amortize a steak? Goodness. You amortize this beef tenderloin into the steaks, you're realizing you're getting these filet mignons for less than $10 a piece, plus you're going to have enough beef left over to make a really good pot of chili or any other sort of cut up beef that you might want to use it for. Still, $10 for a beef tenderloin filet mignon is a bit high, and the thing that I found out was when I put 2 of these filet mignons into the sous vide circulator and I cooked them for 45 minutes, they got too tender. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a piece of steak that's too tender? What happened was it lost a lot of its texture and it became not quite mushy, but pretty close to it. it wasn't as good as when I just cooked it the normal way and it had some of the meaty texture to it. But I started thinking, why do I need to spend this much money for this tender a cut of meat when I've got this machine right here that makes meat tender? Why don't I go see if I can find a less expensive cut of meat and see if we can have the machine make that thing tender? So I did. We went out to the big box store and we found beef top sirloin. Now the beef top sirloin was less than $8 a pound. We could get 2 prepackaged top sirloin steaks for much less than we would expect to pay for tenderloin. Beef top sirloin steak, $7.48 a pound. $14 a pound. And I found that when we put these top sirloin steaks into the sous vide for about 4 hours, the texture is perfect. It's tender, it's flavorful, it's got just the right meat texture to it, and when you finish it, and we'll talk about finishing here in just a second, it's delicious. So you try that and you tell me if you don't agree that top sirloin is almost as good as a filet mignon when you cook it in the sous vide. The last thing I want to talk about here is the finishing step. Now, while sous vide may be a wonderful and marvelous way to cook a piece of meat to destroy all the pathogens in it and to make it juicy and tender, it's not going to look that appetizing. To make it look appetizing, to put a nice crust on the outside of it, you need to have a finishing step. And basically what this means is you need to sear the meat. You can do this under a broiler in the oven, you can do it in a pan, you can do it outside on a charcoal grill. Mostly, I will sear my sous vide steaks in a nonstick frying pan. First, I'll take the sous vide out of the bath or out of the refrigerator. I'm going to tell you about the refrigerated steak here in just a second. I will take it out of the bath, open the bag, lift it out with the tongs, and pat it dry with paper towels because it's going to be nice and juicy moist when you get it out of the cooking bag. But we don't need to get all of that juice into the cooking pan. It might make it stick. Now into that cooking pan, before I put the steak in, I will put in either a tablespoon of bacon fat or a tablespoon of ghee, which is clarified butter, by the way, and let that start melting. And while that's melting, I'll get out the garlic salt and I'll put a light dusting of garlic salt on each side of the meat. When the pan gets up to temperature, the bacon grease or the ghee has melted into a nice puddle, I will put the steak into the pan, and as soon as it hits the pan, I'll start moving it around, because if I don't move it around, it might start sticking to the bottom. I'll let it sit on a pretty high heat while it sears one side, and I'm moving it around gently. Then I'll flip the steak and cook the other side while I'm evaluating how well done the first side is. Sometimes I'll cook it 3 or 4 times on each side as it gets up to the right level of crust and crispiness and the nice brown doneness on each side. Remember, you don't have to cook the steak in the pan, you just have to sear it. You're just finishing each side. It's already cooked, it's been cooked in the sous vide. So you're just searing it on each side, and once that's done, boom, it's time to chow down. Put it on the plate. Here's a clue. Put a little spoonful of brown butter on the steak. The brown butter will seem to disappear because it's the same color as the nicely seared steak, but it just adds a little extra something to it that is wonderful. We can talk about brown butter in another video if you like. Let me know. Okay, one more thing. Some of the experts that I found online have said that if you sous vide a piece of meat and then immediately chill it, either put it in an ice bath in the same bag that you cooked it in until it's cool, or into the refrigerator. I've done that. I've put the sous vide into an ice bath to take the heat out of the steak, and then it goes into the refrigerator. And sometimes, if I'm going to set up the sous vide, why do just one steak? Why not do 3 or 4? If you've got a sous vide bath that's big enough, go ahead and do that. So we eat one of them, the rest of them go into the refrigerator. Well, once they get in the refrigerator, they get chilled, they're cold. And if I take them out and try to sear them while they're cold, I've done this and it's not very good. You get the nice sear on each side of the steak and then you bite into the middle of it and the middle is cold. This is cold in the middle. Not something you want to try unless you really enjoy cold steak. I don't. So what I do is when I'm getting set up to cook one of my sous vide steaks that's in the refrigerator, first I'll fill up a bowl, mixing bowl, with hot water out of the tap. I let it run till it's as hot as it's going to get. Fill up the bowl a little bit deeper than the steak is going to be, and I put the sous vide bag from the refrigerator into the hot water. While the steak is coming up to that warm temperature, I'm over there at the stove getting out the nonstick pan, putting in the ghee or the bacon grease, turning up the heat, letting it melt. By the time the pan is ready to cook the steak will have come up in temperature to pretty much the temperature of the water. The middle of it will be nice and warm so that by the time I put it in the pan and I sear both sides of it, it's not going to be cold in the middle anymore. That pretty much is it about the best way I found to cook a steak. If you have a good way to cook a steak, I'd love to hear about it, especially if it turns out better than this. I'm always open about ways to cook a steak that are better than one I already have. So let me know in the comments if you have a video up about how to cook a steak really well. Let us know that as well. Otherwise, try this sous vide method. Then come back. You may have to bookmark this page so that you can come back to it, but come back and tell us how it worked for you. How did you like the steak? Did it turn out as well as I said it was going to? Let us know. That's it for this video, everyone. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to give old YouTube a goose in the ribs by clicking that thumbs up button. Click the subscribe button and then the bell icon next to it to be notified the next time we post another great tutorial here on David's Tutorials.